Okay, so thank you for joining us all. This training today I'm really excited about. My name is Maggie Woznicki. I'm the coordinator of technical assistance and special projects at Iowa Coalition Against Sexual Assault. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And really excited about this training because we don't often get the opportunity to interact with board members across the state. Usually we're talking to advocates and program staff and administrators. So really excited to be in community with all of you today and learn more about your passions for the organizations you work for and get to discuss kind of your roles and responsibilities. Oftentimes, well, for the past couple of years, I've been working with boards here at Iowa CASA, often in times of crisis, chaos, and conflict. And so it's really great to be here today in kind of that before all that occurs and talking to you all just because you're here and interested and motivated and passionate about the organizations you serve. So really excited. We are a resource for our member programs across the state, but that includes board members. I want you all to know that we're here for you as well. And then we do have, of course, executive directors on the call today, so I really appreciate you as well. We'll talk a lot about how the dynamics of executive directors and boards work together and how that relationship is so important and crucial to functioning boards. So appreciate all of you in attendance. I did want to start off before we go into board development, talking a little bit for those on the call today who don't know Iowa CASA so well, so board members who are new or just haven't interacted with us much. Just talk a little bit about Iowa CASA and then also just about victim services in general. So one of our main jobs here, I've listed on the slide, is to train and certify advocates so that they can talk in confidentiality with survivors across the state. And so we hold victim counselor training, which is required by law. And then we also certify advocates to our service standards. We set best practices in terms of what a member program should be doing in working with survivors. And then we also offer technical assistance, or what I have here is member assistance. And that is just a broad way of saying that we offer training, support, conversations, guidance, consultation to anyone that works or volunteers for a member program that wants to be effective in their role. So that could be something like a phone call with one quick question, or it could be a brainstorming that we have over Zoom. It could be a lot of different things. Unfortunately, none of that is in person right now due to the pandemic, but we are available regular office hours via internet. And then we have prevention funding through the Iowa Department of Public Health. And so we have 3 funded prevention programs. And then we also have a prevention capacity builder on staff that works with programs that are not funded to build their capacity to do so. We have legislative advocacy. And so that means that we are at the Capitol, we're in communication with our lobbyists and legislators at the state and federal level to advocate for policies that support survivors, and then also for funding for your programs. If you've noticed on budgets as you're reviewing for your organization that you pay membership dues, this is where that comes into play. We use membership dues to advocate for policies and funding at the state and federal level. And then we offer legal services for anyone ages 11 and up, and those are actually expanding pretty soon. So our legal team will get in touch with programs about what those will encompass. We do have 2 other organizations that we work closely with. So I just wanted to mention this for folks that work with ICADFA or ICCC, that they offer some of the same programming. Excuse me. Okay, and then we have our victim service map here. So we have 6 regional areas in Iowa. Each one houses a domestic violence, a sexual assault, and a victim service shelter. And then we also have our culturally specific programs that operate, most of them statewide or in specific areas, that serve survivors of specific cultural identities. And I kind of just made this graphic to put it all together. So you are working for a local program or serving on a board of a local program. You offer us information and guidance about what survivors need and want, what your challenges are. We advocate for those at the federal level, and that impacts policies and funding for your programs. So a lot of that is survivor-led and survivor-defined, but also understanding that not all survivors are served by our programs, and there's a lot of work to be done there. I'm just going to give it a pause here and pull up a poll for you all so I can get to know you all a little better. And if you have any questions about victim services at all, feel free to put them in the chat box. Excuse me. So I do have two polls here, one for board members on the call and one for nonprofit employees, if you want to take some time to fill those out. All right, and I do apologize. I feel my voice going out, so there might be a couple breaks, and that's okay. All right, so we have quite a few, let's see here, new board members. And directors were kind of all over the place, some with lots of experience and some who are brand new. Right. That is helpful. And then I did want to offer up the chat box for an activity as well, about just kind of getting an idea of what you think your role is on the board before we go ahead and get started. And so if you could just let me know 1 to 3 words if you're a board member, and if you're executive director, what you think the board should be, but just an adjective or two about the role of the board. And we'll go ahead and pop up the chat box and see what that looks like. We have support, treasurer, a check and balance, general oversight, support the ED and long-term mission and sustainability of the organization, fiduciary oversight, long-term guidance, volunteer, contribute time and resources, and these are all great. So I'm going to go ahead and throw my word out there for you all to see. And it's a little more boring now that I look at all of your beautiful sentiments. That's fiduciary. So fiduciary is someone acting on behalf of another based on an expectation of trust. A nonprofit board is the central decision-making body of the organization. And it has ultimate responsibility and accountability for the organization's actions. So I see the board of directors as the fiduciary for the nonprofit organization. And can we name the 3 fundamental legal duties? I'm gonna throw them out there. So we have duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. So those are our fiduciary responsibilities, but also legal responsibilities via Iowa code. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those.
I'm sorry, Maggie. Could you repeat this is the interpreter. Could you repeat the 3 duties one more time?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
So duty of loyalty, duty of care, and duty of obedience.
Thank you.
Yep. And so we're going to talk more about those and what each of those mean because they are your legal duties, and then we'll go into some more roles and responsibilities today that will help you in meeting those duties. So our duty of care is taking care of the organization. So the duty of care refers to the board's responsibility to be competent, or in legal terms, it's the board must exert the care of an ordinarily prudent person when making some sort of decision. So the duty of care includes 2 functions, decision-making and oversight. In terms of decision-making, which is usually in the form of like a voting matter or some sort of discussion where the board needs to come to a consensus, each director needs to have sufficient information to be able to make an informed vote. And then with the oversight function relates to the board's responsibility for monitoring the organization's operations. So that can mean programs or that can mean financial operations. So the director or board of director needs to have information, general knowledge about the nonprofit's operations and be aware of what the finances disclose. They need to make reasonable inquiries when things just don't seem right. They need to have the ability to ask questions about any sort of troubling or unclear activity. In addition, like internal policies, they need to be aware of these, and we'll go through a lot of the specifics about this after we go through these 3 duties. One thing I came across in a webinar a couple weeks ago that I really appreciated was this metaphor this woman used. Her sister had adopted a few children from DHS. She was fostering them, and then she went to adopt them. And as soon as she signed the adoption papers, she became legally responsible for those babies. They were hers. She was entrusted by the government to make sure that they were loved and cared for. And I kind of view the board of directors in the same light, right? So you could love the organization, you could love the mission, but as soon as you say, hey, I want to be a board member, you have now said, I'm okay being legally responsible and providing oversight and making sure that this organization is sustained and cared for. So I just kind of liked that metaphor and thought I'd share that. Any questions about the duty of care? And it's very broad. All 3 of these legal duties are very broad, which is why we'll go into further detail about some of the ways in which you can make sure that you're meeting them. So the next one is duty of loyalty. Duty of loyalty, and I apologize. One just other thing I did want to mention about duty of care is one way to make sure that this happens, that you are making informed choices, or that you are understanding all of the operations and the programming of the agency, is to make sure you attend board meetings or any other meetings that are called for. Make sure that you're reading board minutes and making sure that you're just keeping track of kind of the trends and data of the field of sexual violence or whatever other services your agency encompasses. So duty of loyalty, this is all about conflicts of interest. You need to make sure that the organization's needs come first. So each board member must put their interests of the organization before any of their personal or professional interests. It also means disclosing any conflicts or potential conflicts that come up. It's really important that your agency has, or your board of directors has, a conflict of interest policy, and that you are regularly signing any sort of disclosures around conflicts of interest. Any sort of discussions that you could potentially have a conflict with, you should be excused from, or any sort of voting matters, those are things that you would opt out of. And then we have, lastly, the duty of obedience. So board members must bear the legal responsibility of ensuring the organization complies with any sort of state, local, or federal laws or regulations. This also includes things like tax requirements. This includes things like safety, health, and occupational regulations. So a lot of different things to think about. And then also, we have here, you need to be obedient to the policies. So thinking about what internal documents that you need to be abiding by. So there's the bylaws and articles of incorporation, and then also just your personnel policies that you need to make sure as a board that you are regularly reviewing, you know what's in them, and that you know that you and the organization are in compliance. And then you need to also, which this one is kind of lovely, that you need to be obedient to the mission of the organization. A lot of times this is why we signed up to be on board of directors, right? And so just regularly reviewing that mission, knowing what it is, and making decisions based on alignment with that mission. The IRS gives certain tax breaks because of the special privileges that come with pursuing your mission. So you really need to make sure that whatever that is, that mission is that's stated on that IRS 990 form, that you are in alignment with that, with all of your budgets, with your programming and such. Any questions on these 3 duties? Okay, so we're going to go through these 10 core board responsibilities, and anyone?
Maggie?
Yep.
Hey, it's Julie. I was just going to mention that about a year ago, Iowa CASA developed formal conflict of interest policies and ethical guideline policies for our board that we have new board members sign, and then we have all board members review and re-sign on an annual basis. So I could send those to you if you want to send them out with your materials.
Thank you, Julie. Yep. All right. Yeah, and we have lots of tools and things that we can share with each other as a community. So if you have anything that you find really helpful, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat box and we can help each other. So these 10 core board responsibilities, you may have seen them in other trainings or resources. They're pretty standard from boardsource.com, so you can always go there. So we've adapted them to kind of meet the needs of sexual assault organizations here in Iowa, and just understanding that these are the core board responsibilities that will help you in fulfilling your, again, fiduciary duties that we had just talked about. Some of these are occasional. You might review them annually or every couple of years, and then some of them are more ongoing, like monthly or bi-monthly. So it is the board's responsibility to determine the mission and purposes and then advocate for them. The mission statement needs to be this rallying point for your board, your volunteers, your staff, your clients. People need to understand it. it's so important because it guides the planning of your organization, and it also is some sort of indicator of success. You know, it's a standard that you can use to evaluate the success of how you're doing when you take a look at what your mission is and what your purpose is. So the responsibility of creating that mission statement came from your board of directors originally, and also the opportunity to review the mission statement or amend it would be the responsibility of the boards in conjunction with the executive director and other paid and volunteered staff and other stakeholders that have some sort of interest in the organization. So again, this is something that you would tackle less often. It's really helpful to review annually when you're thinking about like planning programs, but it's also something to look at when you've maybe expanded your services or limited your services to see if that mission is still in alignment, or if it's just been a really long time, like if no one's really taken the time to really look at it and see if it still fits the people that you're serving or the values that your organization holds, it might be time to kind of think and consider that again. Just remember, if you are changing your mission, you would need to make changes to the IRS 990 form. You'd want to notify the public. You'd want to notify funders and any other like stakeholders of your organization that you've done so. All right, selecting the executive director, a role of the board. So something from just personal experience working with organizations, I found that it's been very chaotic when someone's left the agency and the board hasn't had any sort of formal hiring plan in place before that. People are scrambling. They don't have so much time to do all of the things that you need to do to hire an executive director. Like think about the job description, the announcement, reviewing resumes, creating interview questions, conducting interviews, announcing the final candidate. Like there is a lot that goes into this, right? And so coming up with some sort of plan or process before you're even considering hiring a new director, and even doing this with, and you should do this with the current director, that this isn't some sort of message to that director, but that you want input on what would be helpful, whether they choose to leave the agency, next month or in 20 years. Like it's just something that would really be helpful when the time comes to have that. And so just something to think about. You're gonna, when that time comes that you need to hire an executive director, make sure that you, while it's the board's responsibility, that you have input from staff and stakeholders. And then this goes back to the duty of loyalty, that you're making best decision based on what's good for the organization. So thinking of that and kind of the visions, and if you're doing planning with your agency, like what are your long-term visions for the agency and how is the candidate going to be the right fit based on that. And then one thing I just wanted to note is that EDs assume that they were hired because they have confidence and trust in their ability to get the job done. And so there is this kind of relationship when a new director comes on that we've seen, where some of the boards drop back immediately when someone is filled for that executive director position. They've been so busy working to fill that position. They're like, now someone's here. Thank goodness I can sit back and kind of get back to my normal routine, which for someone new to the agency might not be particularly helpful. But then on the other hand, some people are really enjoyed that day-to-day work as board of directors. They really got to know staff, and they really appreciated kind of being more into that organizational operations. And so some people on boards tend to go the other way, right? So there is this fine balance about supporting a new ED and helping with that transition, but also knowing that you trust them and it's their responsibility, right, to do that day-to-day work. Oftentimes when we see that imbalance, it makes the ED not feel secure or trusted, and we've often seen turnover at a much higher rate. And then the board of directors has to go through this whole process again. So just something to consider. All right, supporting the executive director and evaluating the executive director is also very important. I cannot communicate enough how much the ED board roles and responsibilities and the board roles and responsibilities need to be clearly defined and set between the ED and the board chair, or the ED and the board, just so they have a mutual understanding and respect for one another, and that they can be on the same page. And so success is really dependent on one another. The board cannot fulfill their fiduciary responsibilities without getting specific reports or feedback from what's happening in the day-to-day life of the organization. And the organization executive director cannot do their ability to manage the organization successfully if they don't have the support of the planning and oversight and vision and guidance that the board provides. So that relationship is just very crucial. Assessing performance. So following a process agreed upon by both the board and the ED on a regular basis, maybe that's annually or biannually, that the executive director is evaluated by the board, and that might be like just the board chair, that might be an executive committee, so that's something to determine. The process, how you evaluate the executive director, should oftentimes mirror what the executive director, how they evaluate the staff. But again, that's something that should be discussed between the board and the ED, and then followed that procedure. And then oftentimes just kind of remembering, praising the executive director. Oftentimes they look for you for guidance and support, and so they are kind of alone in their role. You know, other staff have people in similar positions, and so just remembering that it shouldn't be, you know, times of conflict that you're coming together or times to critique performance, but that you have the whole year to kind of offer that feedback. And then what I wanted to just say about compensation, you know, these performance assessments can definitely impact how you have that compensation conversations, but also that there are specific IRS rules that you'll need to follow for that. And so the IRS expects that all nonprofit agencies demonstrate that in setting the executive director's compensation, they have studied compensation at similar levels at other agencies that are like your agency, and that you have documented these findings, and that you ensured that the final decision was made by individuals who do not have a personal stake in the results. So again, going back to conflict of interest, right? So just keep in mind that as you're having conversations about processes and talking about evaluating performance and having conversations about compensation. I'm just gonna hit pause here. Any questions or anything that comes up for you? Okay, thank you for being patient with me as I drink my tea and water and get through this. All right. The next one is planning for organization's development. So oftentimes we hear the word strategic planning, but that's just another way of saying that engaging in long-term planning for the organization. So as it's the board's responsibility to set the mission and purpose for the organization, it should also be engaged in planning processes to determine specific goals the agency should seek to accomplish in order to pursue its mission. So you're setting the mission, you're evaluating it, but also you're engaged in that planning of how we're going to reach that point, how we're going to get there. It can happen a lot of different ways. Sometimes folks bring in outside consultants to facilitate conversations around planning. You don't have to. There's plenty of resources on strategic planning out there. We'd be happy to guide you to those. And another point, this is one of those where you're working with staff, you're working with the director to kind of guide that strategy, right? You need those people that are in the field doing the day-to-day work to get feedback about what's realistic, what's doable, and things like that. And one thing to note about this is that boards and staff often resist planning. How many can identify with this? That it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of group thought and group discussion. So there's, no consensus on the direction of an agency, and no implementation of action will not result in an organization functioning effectively. So it's really helpful to have some sort of plan to get all on the same page and to know what the goals of the agency are. Has anyone engaged in any sort of formal strategic planning process that they'd want to share with the group about what that kind of looked like and what was helpful? If you want to raise your hand. All right, so we're going to go to ensuring access to resources. So this is absolutely a job for the board of directors. You are the #1 fundraising agent of the agency. The board sets the course for the agency. We just talked about strategic planning, talked about missions. Well, the agency needs money to accomplish those, right? And so it's the board's responsibility to look into and ensure that they have enough, the agency has enough resources for the staff to fulfill their goals. It's a good idea if you're doing some sort of planning process to think about what financial goals and include those in the plan so that you can make financial resources marry the programmatic goals that you have in mind. So the board is responsible for securing funding resources to ensure the financial viability of the organization and its programs. Asking for and giving money are necessary, and they are uncomfortable. We can admit to both of those, right? I think it would be a great opportunity for a board to kind of think about their ways in which they're going to ask for money and practice with each other, come up with a plan, get comfortable asking for money with your board members, and then you can do it to folks outside of the agency. While it does require some staff support to complete fundraising, it's important not to rely on staff for that. Many sexual assault advocates and programs are nearly 100% government funded or very highly government funded, and so they cannot, as part of their official duties due to government grants, fundraise. So it can't be, part of their jobs, and someone needs to do it for the agency. So that's why we appreciate boards for that. It can be delegated as part of like a committee of the board if you want to have a fundraising committee to really take a closer look at that. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of every board member to raise and give some sort of funds to the organization. And it can be something more than hosting special events, solicit, we need folks to solicit individual donors too and engage them in our movement and part of our community. And also it's just important because diversity in funds. So, we have our government grants, we have maybe some community support, foundation support, but we really need those individual donors as well to ensure the financial success of our organization and make sure it's financially stable. It also is really important to generate income beyond daily operational needs in order to build cash reserves for both like capital and operational long-term needs. So really making sure that we have money beyond what is our day-to-day, and we have some in reserves is really important to the stability of the organization. And we have Julie, our financial director, on here. I'm not going to call her out, but anytime you want to jump in about any of this, feel free, Julie. the last thing I wanted to say about raising resources for your organization is that funding of sexual assault programs, as I mentioned, just heavily relies on government grants, and it really restricts our ability to engage in creative thinking, to engage in holistic support for survivors because of so many restrictions that are placed in those grant contracts. And so really our ability to accurately meet the needs of survivors does rely on some unrestricted funding. Not only do we need to raise resources, we need as boards to manage resources effectively. So because you are the guardian, and I speak to the boards here, you're the guardian of the agency and its resources, it is the responsibility of the board to make sure these resources are used wisely. In order to determine how to allocate these resources, the board should develop, and this is in conjunction with the executive director and any sort of fiscal staff, and you should develop and approve an annual budget for the agency. After the budget is approved, you need to monitor that budget to make sure that the agency remains in the parameters of that budget. The program is accountable to its funders, its clients, and the general public, really. So current, complete, and accurate financial records are critical to meeting the legal obligations of the organization. The board should receive and read financial reports on a regular basis. It's the board's job to ask clarifying questions if the financial reports are unclear, and make time to read these carefully in order to monitor the agency's fiscal health. Now, boards should receive training on nonprofit finances if that is just not your area of expertise. You should get comfortable asking questions about finances, and then you can also seek consultants or board experts when necessary. So if it's something like creating financial policies, definitely lean on folks even outside your board that have that area of expertise, like a CPA or something like that. The board needs to also ensure that the agency receives an audit each year that files necessary government and funder reports. And then also there's a note on here about transparency. So we need to ensure proper internal controls are in place because ultimately nonprofits are accountable to the public and to its funders. So we need to provide, and this is by law, we need to provide copies of the last 3 years of IRS forms, IRS Form 990 to anyone that requests it. And we need to disclose the cost of fundraising in comparison to the amounts raised to anyone that requests it. So these are two kind of legal things we are bound by. And one suggestion I have is just putting these forms on your website, making it easy for folks to find it and not having to reach out to you. So putting something like the last 3 years of your Form 990 on the agency's website is really helpful in just being transparent and accountable. And then the last kind of ethical piece of this is making sure that no single person should be in control of receiving, depositing, and expending funds, and that an agency has a whistleblower policy or a confidential procedure for reporting anything like fraud or embezzlement.
Maggie, just to give your voice a break for a second, I can let people know what we do at Iowa CASA in terms of what you were just talking about for number 6. So for our board meets every other month, and we provide them with a copy of our profit and loss statement and our balance sheet for the fiscal year up through the last month that the fiscal department has our records officially closed out. And then I present those to the board, and I also send them ahead of time to our board treasurer so they have time to review them and also ask any questions. And ideally your board treasurer is someone who has some sort of accounting, banking, finance background, something that they know and understand how to interpret financial statements is helpful. The other things that we do is we have our auditor come in or via Zoom, depending on if we're in a pandemic or not, present our 990 and our audit formally in person to the board. And so they go through those documents with the board and give the board members an opportunity to ask questions to the auditor as well. And the other thing that I do is I prepare every year a document that lists all of our funding sources and what the source, the dollar amount of how much we get, the award period, and then just a brief sentence or two or paragraph about the funding source and the purpose of the funds. And I think that you all know and have learned that in any field, we use a lot of acronyms, especially when it comes to funding and funders. And so I like that document as something that they can refer back to if we're talking about CVAD or RPE or CDC or whatever, that they have a document that they can refer back to. So I also have a list of common acronyms and what they mean.
Thanks, Julie. Any questions? All right, we're going to move on here. So determining and monitoring the organization's program and services. So we talked about monitoring the finances, also the duty of the board to kind of oversee the programs and services. So the fundamental responsibility of the board is to ensure the current and proposed programs are in alignment with the stated mission and purposes of the organization. And so given so much limited dollars and so many demands on staff, there's oftentimes competing priorities. So really taking a deep look and discussing what programs make sense. And then in conjunction with staff should determine when programs and services should be changed in order to change the evolving needs of clients and communities. So kind of assessing any trends in the field or trends in your community are really important so that you can adapt programming as it's time. And this is all done, in alignment with, the staff and the executive director who have that kind of firsthand knowledge of what's happening in the field. So some ways you can do this are, here are a couple of questions you can be kind of asking the executive director. So what data, or just asking each other for a group discussion, what data and information will help us assess our operational effectiveness, our financial condition, and our programmatic activity. So what kind of data do we already have our hands on that can help us determine if we're on the right track here? What difference are we trying to make, and do these programs are they compatible? Does it make sense? And how do we know whether we are making a difference or succeeding at our mission? And oftentimes missions of victim service programs are very long-term, right? And they're in the future. So having those strategic plans, as I talked about earlier, are so important to make sure we're kind of meeting milestones on the way and headed in the right direction. Enhancing the organization's public standing. So the board members of an organization are the main representatives to the community. In order to promote the organization, board members should be able to speak enthusiastically about an organization's missions, its goals, and its programs. Board members should take any time they can have to talk and promote the organization to any sort of civic groups, religious groups, community groups, any sort of individuals that express interest. As an agency, the executive director and the board should designate an official spokesperson, but any sort of casual basis or informal time you have the opportunity to speak well about the organization is going to help further the mission of the agency. So really important. You know, as we're talking about mission statements earlier, how many of you as board members can recite the mission statement of your agency? I think about just, again, kind of a board development idea I have is really talking through, excuse me, key messages or talking points that you have and practicing those informal conversations about the agency. So thinking about, you know, someone asks you, you know, if you've heard of this agency and you say, well, yeah, I've been on the board for X many years, you know, this is what their mission is. And, you know, here's an example of how they're making change in the community, and give some sort of a specific example of an amazing program or a client success story. So really creating those key messages or talking points to be able to inform the public about the services of the agency, to bring in more stakeholders, to increase the resources and finances of the agency. So all really important pieces. One thing, and this is again just a suggestion, some folks do it, some organizations do it, but putting out some sort of annual report is one way to accomplish this. So letting, you know, you as a board can't talk to the entire community, right? Whoever your community is. So having some sort of annual report that reflects the accomplishments of the agency could be really valuable in spreading it more widely to funders, to social media, and to the general public. Ensuring legal and ethical integrity and maintaining accountability. Yeah, this one sounds fun, doesn't it? So as part of your duty of obedience, as we talked about earlier, the board of directors is responsible for ensuring that the organization is in compliance with all applicable laws. And so really thinking about establishing a system that encourages ethical and legal activity, you must set policies for the organization. So thinking about, Julie had mentioned some, but major policy areas like financial policies, personnel policies, conflict of interest. Also, just to note that one of our main funders for victim service programs, the Crime Victim Assistance Division, has a whole list of personnel policies that they require each organization to have. And so checking that list to make sure it marries your handbook or your policy list for your organization. So the board must ensure that all the policies meet minimum legal requirements, and many boards choose to have folks like an attorney review the personnel policies, like an employment attorney, or again, like a CPA, review their financial policies. So you can utilize those kind of experts in your community to review things, so you make sure that they are meeting adequate standards. But ultimately, it is the board's responsibility for ensuring the agency's compliance with all of these rules and regulations. And then also, in line with ensuring, you know, legal and ethical integrity and maintaining accountability, is that you have a set of policies that benefit your organization, and so making sure that you're setting a standard by following those as well as a board of directors. And so really looking at your bylaws, your articles of incorporation, and your policies on a regular basis to make sure that your agency is in compliance. If you are not, if the board or the executive team or the executive director is not following policies, the agency becomes vulnerable to lawsuits. So really important that you have policies for a reason, and then you need to follow them, right? All right, board development. This one's more fun. So what I put here is an intentional approach to the responsibilities 1 through 9. And so this one is the most creative and flexible of all of the responsibilities like we talked about. So really applying everything you learned today, or everything you know about your roles and responsibilities, and taking a strategic approach to thinking about how you're going to make the organization functional and effective and fulfill all of those responsibilities. So, you know, especially when I think about the term limits of boards, you have people with certain expertise coming on and then people offboarding as well, that your dynamics change within the board, like your strengths and deficits, excuse me. And so really important to kind of assess on a regular basis, like, where are our gaps of knowledge, where are our strengths, and then also just looking at trends in the field again, and just kind of coming up with a big picture of like, what are the areas that we really need to grow as a board, and make, in order to make informed choices. Again, it goes back to duty of care, this piece especially, that if you are actively working to enhance your knowledge and making competent, informed decisions on behalf of the agency, that you're fulfilling your duty of care. So thinking through things like creating a board work plan for the calendar year. So like setting aside, excuse me, setting aside time on your calendar every year, including if your agency makes some sort of planning or like strategic plan, that you're including board goals and objectives in there, that you're engaged in committee work. So whatever committees you have as an organization, that they're really engaging on a regular basis, and that you just offer up opportunities to learn continuously. So sharing articles or resources that you found helpful, participating in webinars and doing things like that, inviting people to speak at your board meetings, and just acknowledge that this is like a lot of work and a lot of time, and that some of this might have to be done outside of the regular, every other month board meeting, or however often you meet as a board, that you might have to spend extra time in fulfilling those goals. So those are our 10 kind of responsibilities that if we can, get to those, then we're meeting all 3 of those fiduciary responsibilities: the duty of loyalty, the duty of care, and the duty of obedience. I did want to pause and just say, like, how are we feeling as a group? And if you want to put in the chat box how you're feeling given all of this information. Does it spark any emotions for you? Does it feel doable? Local, so let's see, Christy says, noting lots of good ideas. Mine, personally frustrated by the resistance of local partners to increase transparency and accountability. Yeah, that's tough. Would love to talk more about that. I also just thank you all for listening to my hoarse voice for the past hour or so. Just really hoping that not talking the last few days would have helped me be smooth sailing here. All right, so oftentimes, particularly for new board members, I know that this can sound like a lot, and so I just want to acknowledge that, and that it is, but it's not something that we need to do all tomorrow or at our next board meeting, right? That's what's so great about the opportunity to serve on a board, is that you're engaged in like kind of visioning and thinking about the big picture, and so you have opportunities to just sit back and say, like, hey, like, what do we want to learn about and move forward, and how do we want to do that? That's just a really great place. And so it doesn't have to be done all right now, but it can help you get there. So just some tips or pointers for thinking about where you start in meeting all of these obligations. Taking a look at your bylaws. When was the last time the board reviewed the bylaws of the organization and kind of do a checklist of like which are you in compliance with, and if there's any that you are not, then maybe starting there. There are plenty of board assessment tools out there, and so I'd be happy to bring those, or bring those to your agency or email those to you. Plenty out there that you can kind of utilize as a starting point to assess kind of strengths and deficits. Also assessing commitment. So this, like I said, board duty is not something that's you can just keep to your monthly meetings, right? There's going to be a lot of work that happens outside of those meetings. And I say monthly as an example. But, is this something that you can really say, I feel like I can, take on this legal and ethical responsibility, that I can do it with prudence and care. And so really assessing that, because it is such an important role for our programs. And then also setting yourself up for success. So you have an opportunity to engage new folks in this work. And so as you're doing so, really taking care of who you're onboarding to the agency and making sure that they're going to be a value add to your board of directors. So really thinking intentionally about your board composition, particularly for our non-culturally specific programs. If you've had historically white-led boards, really assessing how you can be intentional in your approach and making that a more diverse and also inclusive board, to have voices representative that have historically been lost in our movement or ignored in our movement. And so taking time to do that, also thinking about really having deep conversations with people who are thinking about joining boards and understanding their responsibilities and commitment ahead of time. Thinking about an orientation packet or some sort of new information packet for folks that are joining, setting up meetings to get to know one another, joining in committee work right away, getting folks up to speed on current business so that they're not lost in those first couple of board meetings. And then just thinking about ways to engage with one another that makes you excited to talk about this organization, that makes you excited to go to board meetings or read the minutes. I know that sounds hard to do, but thinking about how you're going to come together around the mission of this agency, thinking back to your why, like why you joined this board of directors is really important. And thinking about like, where's the disconnect if we're not attending, we're having board members not attending meetings or not fully engaged. Where's the disconnect and how can we make this a more fulfilling experience for folks? And then I just want to, kind of leave you with this, is that we are here for you 100%. So we can provide, more detailed trainings on any of the topics we talked about today, or educational resources or articles. Happy to review documents, whether that be policies or like onboarding documents that you have, commitment forms, anything like that. Of course, kind of noting that caveat with reviewing policies that we can't make any personnel related decisions on your behalf. We cannot provide employment related legal advice. So if you're looking for that particular expertise, that you'll need to seek, that outside of Iowa CASA. But that we can also just help in consultation and planning, just guide discussions, and kind of think things through with you, brainstorm with you. That's what we're here for. And if we don't have the resources or expertise, we'll definitely look for that for you and get you connected. And then these 3 resources are particularly helpful for folks that are wanting to know about legal and ethical duties. The last one is from our very own Iowa CASA resource sharing project. So they have a board toolkit with all sorts of good information in it. One of them is financial questions to ask, which I thought was a really good one. So kind of those things you should be thinking about when you're reviewing financial information. Just a whole lot of good stuff in there. So I'm going to unshare. That's just pulling up the word I'm looking for. Stop share. Okay, so that is the end of today's presentation. I think I would have gotten a little bit more detail and had I had more of a voice, so I do apologize for that. I'll probably send out a recording when my voice is better so that you can share it with your boards, but also that we can do this one-on-one with your agencies as well. Any questions or anything that you want to talk about as a community here?
Maggie, I just put in the chat box to a link and a resource for Funding for Good, which has a lot of amazing resources and a lot of free materials and handouts. And they have a section, and I put the link in the chat box that they call free stuff, which basically they said that anything in that in there is in Word and that people can use it, and it's in Word specifically so people can customize it. And so they've got a lot of good resources about like a board building kit checklist, kind of what you just went through of basic roles and responsibilities of board directors. They have a new board member onboarding checklist, some onboarding strategies. They just have a lot of good information that I just kind of recently discovered that I've been sharing with our board a lot.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, I wasn't aware of who I could get advice from, but now that I know it, I will do so. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think we're, like I had said, we're often kind of pulled in at the last minute to help in times of chaos or crisis. And so, but we are absolutely here when those things aren't happening and you're just, you know, hoping to engage and be more effective in your roles. So absolutely here for board of directors of programs. And we do, yeah, Beth had mentioned, thank you to all the board members participating. Like it's so vital to our programs to have strong boards. Like we've seen it firsthand how functional boards create functional sexual assault services for survivors. And so just so valuable. There is definitely a connection there and we really appreciate it. And if there's no other questions, I'm also going to put I don't think my email was in there. So my email, you may have received it as part of registration, but it's membership@iowacasa.org. If you want any tools, resources, or training, just let us know. And I hope everyone has a great Saturday.